Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's short tech episode, we are going to be covering setting the end float on your primary gear on a 1275 engine, specifically the supercharged one right here. So, stay tuned. Today's episode is brought to you by you. That's right. Every single episode created on Classic Mini DIY is made with the help of our patrons and our long-term part sponsor, 7 Mini Parts. If you want to see more mini stuff and more videos in the future, please consider supporting the channel on patreon.com/Classic Mini DIY or by checking out some of my awesome merch like t-shirts, stickers, and all sorts of other really cool stuff at merch.classicminidiy.com. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Now, like I said, we are going to be covering the primary gear and the end float associated with that primary gear on a 1275. Now, right here, we are looking at the tail end of the crankshaft. So this is technically the back side of your engine, although with the Mini, it is mounted transversely, which means sideways. So the end of your engine, the back side of your engine where the clutch and everything sits, actually sits on the side opposite the radiator. Now, this process of setting the end float is quite important. It determines how much play there is on this gear in and out like this on the tail of your crankshaft. And it needs to be in spec. This is something that has to be done when you rebuild an engine. And on today's episode, I want to show you guys how to do that. Now, this is a 29 tooth primary gear. This is for an A+ set of drop gears, so specifically this idler gear and the input gear down here. This whole set needs to match. Otherwise, you're not going to get proper engagement and the gears are not going to spin correctly. So this primary gear is actually a refurbished one from Guessworks. I had a primary gear that was actually set up for this idler gear. It was a 29 tooth as well. However, something I didn't know about my old engine and my A-series crankshaft, which between A+ and A-series crankshafts, there's no difference in terms of the size of this tail unless it's been machined down because of some sort of damage or failure. So in my case, prior to me getting my engine, this is years and years ago, somebody had already polished down and ground down this tail on my A-series crank. So the primary gear was bushed and reamed to fit the smaller tail end, which meant that it didn't fit on this crankshaft, even though A+, A-series cranks are the same in terms of size here for 1275s. As a result, got a new primary gear. This was reamed by John Guess, and new bushings have been installed. It's a beautiful primary gear, really, really mint. Just great quality. And he sent over a few of the thrust washers that sit on this face of the crank right here. This face right here. Now they come in different sizes, and they come in different sizes so that you can bring your primary gear within spec. So when you install this, you first install the thrust washer, then your primary gear, and then you measure your end float. It's a pretty straightforward process. The way that we're going to be measuring the end float on this is with a dial indicator gauge. So first thing that we want to do is let's jump over to my workbench. I want to show you guys the different washers that I have so you know the ones that I have to work with, and then we can find the right one to fit this application here and the amount of wear between this primary gear and the crankshaft already present. Now what we have here are 4 different thicknesses of thrust washer. These were the one on the far left, the thinnest one I have, is the one that was on my old crankshaft. And then the 3 following that to the right are my new thrust washers that we'll be using if we have to oversize it. So these are all measuring different thicknesses to help you achieve the correct amount of play in that primary gear on the end of your crankshaft. It's not too complicated. Basically, this is the thickest one and this is the thinnest one. And that's all there is to it. So what we're going to do is start with the thinnest thrust washer first, and then we're going to see what our measurement is for our end float, and then we'll determine whether or not we need to upsize it to any of the 3 that are on the right, or if we can stick with the one that we have there on the left. So back over to the engine and we'll get that spec'd. Now, like I said, the first thing we are going to do is install our thrust washer. Now on the thrust washers that haven't been modified at all, that are stock right from the factory, they actually have a tapered side on them, and then the other side is perfectly flat. The tapered side goes towards the engine because this lip right here is ever so slightly tapered. So you need the tapered side to go towards the engine, otherwise it's not gonna operate properly. So that goes on just like this, looking real good, spinning nicely. Now the next thing that we want to do is set up our primary gear on here after installing this thrust washer. And the way that we do that is simply by installing our gear, sliding it over. There should be no resistance when you put this on. There shouldn't be any sort of difficulty installing it, nothing like that. It should slide over pretty easily. One thing I do want to recommend is that these little divots right here in the end of your tail, sometimes those will develop burrs on them, and if they do, you can get a small file and just file those burrs off. Don't go crazy or anything, but just take your time and file them down because otherwise it will scratch up the bushing inside here. Anyway, so we're going to slide this on just like that. Then we are going to install our retaining ring as well as the C-clip just like that. Looking good. So after that's installed, what we're going to be measuring is the amount of play as it moves in between the C-clamp right here, this actual retaining ring, and the thrust washer on the back. Now looking at this from the bottom side, you'll see that I have my dial indicator gauge zeroed out right there. And the indicator gauge is sitting on this lip of the primary gear right now. We're going to use that as our testing surface. And then what we're going to do is move the primary gear in and out. Now, I'm sorry about the kind of hard to see dial indicator gauge here. That is just the result of a kind of awkward angle in which we need to set this up. So the way that this works now is we pull it out, and you'll see that dial indicator gauge goes out, and we're looking at about 3 thou right there. Like I said, we are looking for 3 to 4 thou, and that's literally right at 3 thou, which is on the tighter side, but should be just fine. Now, in the event that this was any larger, we would need to get a thicker thrust washer and install it behind the primary gear here. So what I'm going to do is just double check this with a set of feeler gauges as well. I want to make sure that the reading is correct. However, with a dial indicator, you should be in great shape, assuming that you dialed it in correctly at the beginning. So after a remeasure, we are not actually in spec. That dial indicator, maybe I was reading it incorrectly, but we are not in the desired spec, unfortunately, which is fine. We'll just have to get a bigger thrust washer. Now you might have just seen I've switched out the retaining ring here. I have a few of these, and these have a tendency to wear down as well. So if you can't get it in spec, which ironically we can't right now, despite this being a newly bushed primary gear, because this retaining ring was out of spec. Now there's a couple ways that you can fix this. Either get a new one of these rings. You can try flipping this C-ring around, and it might give you enough tightness and tolerance to tighten this primary gear up, or increasing the thrust washer here. However, now that we have switched out the actual retaining rings, it's too tight, so now we're going to need to go back down on our thrust washers. All right, so after a lot of switching around and playing with this, we have found a thrust washer that matches the spec that we need here. So on this side, we have 0.1155 of thickness on our thrust washer, and we have these retaining rings. These ones were out of my stockpile, the ones that I have just laying around. And of course, this new bushing, we got right into spec at 0.004 or 4 thou, which is going to be the desired spec here. Now, to get a 100% accurate reading, you technically need 2 feelers. So one that you can run on both sides here. I lost my other set of feeler gauges, but I am confident in the way that this feels and the way that this is measuring. When I take all the force off of this, when I push it all the way down here, I'm getting exactly 4 thou. So I'm feeling real good about this. If you guys have any questions about this, post them in the comment section. But if you are doing this with feeler gauges, you do need 2 so you can run on both sides. So now we have a primary gear that's ready to be completely installed, and we can get our transfer case installed, which I'll be doing on the next episode of the Supercharged build. Now, hopefully you guys are enjoying these kind of short form individual topic videos I'm doing on engine building. I'm trying to use them to complement some of the engine building stuff I've done before, so you're not having to sit through an entire build episode and just to find out what, you know, how to set your Endfloat on your primary gear. Now, like I said, if you have any questions about this, please post them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them. And I cannot stress this enough that if you are testing this at home and you've not done it before, it's extremely important for you to have 2 feeler gauges so you can properly measure the Endfloat on this primary gear. The only reason I'm comfortable letting this go is because I know what this feels like. I'm comfortable with the feeling of this primary gear, and of course it's going to be on my own engine. If I was building this for a customer, or if you guys were doing this for the first time, you absolutely need 2 feeler gauges. But that is going to wrap up this episode of Classic Mini DIY. I hope you enjoyed it, and until the next time, and until I see you guys again, enjoy those minis and motor on.